So we are the last panel, the last scheduled event, and there's no particular reason why we have to continue as long as is marked on the schedule. That brings us kind of late on Saturday afternoon, but I thought it might be nice to just wrap up in some way here. I think I've been in front of the crowd enough, but why don't we go from left to right? And Cathy, we was here last night, but maybe each introduce yourself rather than me introducing you. I think that will save my voice and provide more variety.
Okay,
Cathy?
I'll say a little bit. I'm Cathy Koshland. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Education at Berkeley and a professor in public health, energy and resources, and engineering. I am a proud Cal past parent and the holder of 2 Stanford graduate degrees.
I'm Eric Grimson. I'm the Bernard Gordon Professor of Medical Engineering at MIT, which has nothing to do with this conference. Professor of Computer Science, and I have the privilege of serving as MIT's Chancellor for Academic Advancement. MIT's real chancellor's at the back of the room. What I bring to this is I was part of the original group that helped create MITx. I was on the board for several years, and I guess I often say my I don't know if they're credentials, but I've had the pleasure over 34 years of teaching a little north of 11,000 MIT undergraduates. And I do have a MOOC, and I believe we're closing in on 500,000 students. A colleague pointed out that because it's about introduction to computer science, I'm not only destroying the software industry in the United States, I'm now working on destroying the software industry nationally or internationally. Peter.
I can't follow that. So, I'm Peter Bohl. I teach Chinese history at Harvard. I'm also the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning, which is an effort to combine 3 sorts of activities, all of which have been represented amply here at this conference. One is HarvardX, which produces our massive open online courses. Another is research, and another is our efforts to improve residential teaching and learning through HILT, the Harvard Initiative on Learning and Teaching. And I also teach, I've taught a course which is still running called China X, which is, I believe, at 18 months, the longest MOOC that was ever created, or should be created for that matter, but all of Chinese history. What else do I have to say? I think that's probably enough.
Great, so we are 3 engineers.
And a intellectual historian of China.
Right, and we are here because our 4 institutions have been the sponsors of this meeting over the last 4 years in various ways. I thought maybe we'd start with one topic just to pick up on a specific. I don't know where I've heard the term MOOC bashing. It kind of came up, and I've heard it a few times. So I thought maybe we could end on a positive note on that topic and maybe just say a little bit about what we see positively coming out of that movement here at this point. I'll go last if you want to start with Peter on the left.
So, at Harvard, which is this somewhat feudal institution with professional schools, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, extremely decentralized, we've been doing online learning for tuition, for credit, in a number, through the Division of Continuing Education, but also recently, mainly online degree program in public health epidemiology. We've been doing blended learning, particularly taking the digital assets that were created for HarvardX and bringing them back into the curriculum. There's professional education, executive education, and things like that. But when we started to do HarvardX courses, it was really situated within the framework of all these other things the university was doing. And it was as for everybody, right? All of a sudden we had all these students all over the world. And then we started to make these discoveries. 70% post-BA, 70% abroad, 70% millennials, right? Who would have known? Who would have guessed, right? And then we found out something else about our particularly Harvard students, which may not be true universally, but by surveys, they proclaim that 80% are motivated by lifelong learning. Well, that's extraordinary because we were always told that people do MOOCs because they want to advance their careers. And it turned out to be a fairly small number that were motivated by that. And if we start to look at it, we say, well, what is HarvardX doing? And in fact, what I think HarvardX is doing, we're not really good at vocational education. We're not very good at training new skills. We have some courses that do that pretty well. You've all heard of CS50, for example. Although whether that trains you in a skill, I'm not sure at all. But I think
like
what we really do is we actually do liberal arts and sciences MOOCs. And we draw on our professional schools those courses that they do that are not meant for continuing education in their discipline, in their profession. We draw in courses on contracts, on anatomy, on religious scripture from the various professional schools because they belong in a liberal arts education. And so what we've done is, in effect, not only expanded the liberal arts curriculum for the world, but also for Harvard itself. And we've brought our schools together in a new way. And I think it's just wonderful. I wish it pay for itself, but that's a second concern.
Let's not go down that road yet.
John, I'm going to take a second to give an historical perspective. And historical is going to be short. It's 4 years. So I'm not as good as you are, Peter. But I think it tells you something about what's happened in this space. So the historical perspective, for me, is in, I'm going to guess it's 5 years. In 2011, when MIT announced the launch of MITx, Raphael Reif, then the provost, today MIT's president, articulated 3 reasons why MIT wanted to do this. And for those of you who know the history, this was building on having launched OpenCourseWare about 10 years earlier, and today we've had 175 million unique people access the material in OpenCourseWare. Raphael articulated 3 reasons. The first, and I think this was the order in which he saw them, was how do we use digital tools, online learning, to change the way we teach on campus? Yeah. The second was, could we make available to those students, and I'm going to say this very carefully, with the desire and the capability, could we make available global opportunities to study them? And the third was, how do we use these tools to learn about learning? And I give you that context because I saw another phrase that was used as MOOC mania. I guess I kind of like that, although it sounds like something with t-shirts and funny logos on it. But
well, let's do those.
There you go, John. And we'll pay for HarvardX as we do it that way. We had hype around it. We had statements made about this that probably in retrospect, many of the people who made them would like to retract because it's not going to completely change the world of higher education. But I think it's still an incredibly valuable tool. And so to finish my comment, I'll give you just two data points. And you can argue whether this is a MOOC or not, but using those tools on MIT's campus, we only have 4,500 undergraduates. But our numbers, and I know Ike or somebody will correct me if I get them wrong, is something like 3,800 to 4,000 of them every term are doing something in a course with extensive use of those online tools. And we're trying to measure what's the impact of doing that. And whether that's because of the MOOC or not, it's a tremendous place, I think, to be. And the second one, I think, is, for me, for the MOOC, one of the things that's great is that it can at least help level the playing field for people that might not otherwise have access to, they're not going to get admitted because they don't win the lottery to an elite school in the US. And, I'm sure many of you have heard it, but, our favorite example is the 16-year-old kid from Ulaanbaatar that took the first MOOC that MIT put up, got 100% on everything in the class, and there was lots of skepticism about, really, 16-year-old in Mongolia? By the way, the principal of that high school who had encouraged him to take that class, which is why he took it, was an MIT grad, first Mongolian ever to graduate from MIT, happened to be my academic advisee, and he attested to us the kid is that good. And finally, that young man is finishing his junior year at MIT, and I snuck a look at his grades, which you cannot say, and I'm recording this as I say it. Perfect 5.0 student, doing really well. If we can level the playing field a little bit for people around the world, we're not going to solve all the problems, but to me, there's still a value in doing that when you can find that talent. And I wish it was a case where he didn't come to MIT. This isn't just for MIT to attract it. It's for him to have a chance to get into a place that he might not otherwise, just because of where he's coming from. So lots of things still to do, but there's some real pluses to what the MOOCs do, I think, for the place.
Cathy, any thoughts?
I think that we are in that space. We've had some very successful courses. I think I take a little, perhaps, I don't want to bash the MOOCs. I think they've had I think the MOOC effort and it has made a difference in particularly the on the ground experience. Those faculty who have engaged in constructing MOOCs or in using online tools have shifted the conversation on campus. And if I look back over the 4 years, there was amazing skepticism and resistance, certainly on our campus. Sessions in the academic senate, concerns that we would all be replaced by robots or something, that there was a threat to pedagogy. And I would say that has very much shifted. Not that everyone is engaged, but the resistance, I think, in the institution, the threat that faculty felt is not there. Where I would say we still have huge challenges is faculty time and resources. If there's anything that's limiting the engagement with these tools, with these approaches, it is faculty time and resources.
I agree.
Although I will say, I'll just shout out one thing. We're having a presentation this spring called Waves of Innovation, which our Center for Teaching and Learning is focusing as a faculty showcase for materials. And we thought we might get 10 to 12 faculty willing to come and present what they're doing, and we had 25 in a nanosecond. Say they want to come and share. So that just gives you a sense of it. It is happening, but just at a much slower pace than we might have anticipated 4 years ago.
Great. So to give you a little bit of perspective, and numerically, I think we have over the last few years in the group that I've worked with had about 720 different projects, where a project consists of faculty or instructional team working with our group either to develop some technology or some new idea in their on-campus course, or to develop a MOOC, something that reaches out. If they do one followed by the other, we count that as 2 projects. So if you can divide the 720 by 2, it's still in the hundreds. We've probably worked with about 2 to 225 tenure line faculty in that count, and about 300 instructors overall. That's affected about 125, 130 Stanford courses, if I have the number right, and produced about 75 or so distinct MOOCs, some of which have been run 10 to 15 times, reaching on the order of 2 million unique learners here. So that, as a matter of scale, has been very significant. We've reached a lot of people in a lot of different ways. I think that in and of itself is valuable. And then just to kind of give a summary, I have a little list of different ways that different faculty have approached the medium, and in some sense what their goals have been. So first, there are a few people that have become these kind of MOOC stars. There are 15 or 20 of these worldwide who walk into any cafe in any place in the world, or get out of the airplane in some foreign airport, and they get a string of people coming up and asking for their autograph. We have 2 or 3 or maybe 5 people in that category, not a huge number. Andrew Ng at his machine learning course is at the top of number of enrolled people, and he's obviously recognized many places. Dan Bonnet, my colleague in the computer security lab at Stanford, is in the top 10 list by total enrollment according to whatever's one of these sites that aggregates and collects information. So there's a few people have just followed straightforwardly that idea. Some have been used as a research vehicle. In some cases, the instructor produced the course once and then got out of the way, but we've modified it several different times as a result of requests from graduate students to say, well, what if you inserted this in the course? Would it be better for people or not? So there's some issues there, or just going through the data on that. A few faculty have explored the kind of multi-use MOOC, an on-campus course, a summer course for students that are enrolled in paying tuition, professional education, sort of role for some of the material. So that's been a nice kind of collection of uses for something that takes a fair amount of time to produce. Another category has to do with some unique resource and making that available. One example has to do with medieval manuscripts. We sent a team into the library here at the library in Cambridge, UK, to make digital representations of material that wouldn't be otherwise accessible. Similarly, we are the repository for the M.L. King archives here on campus. Clay Carson, who's the curator and scholar around that, is very proud of the things that he's been able to make available. And I think what really got him excited was not just making this available, because public television would also cover some things around this, but his interest in raising awareness and enthusiasm around using original sources to understand the life of a historical figure. So it's really pushed his academic interest around the archives as well as access to the archives. A couple other things: network distributed courses to connect people up at different points of the world, and then public service kinds of content. Childhood nutrition course has been in that category and may really have some impact by giving information and examples of how to cook nutritiously that may improve nutrition. So I think all of those different categories represent different kinds of interests. They don't really fall simply into the original pattern of the best course in philosophy that everyone will take and put all the good universities otherwise out of business. But I think they're exploring the medium and doing something really interesting.
Could I add one thing, something we haven't mentioned?
Yeah.
And this is something I've learned from Rob Liu and Samantha Earp, who run the Harvard X program. And that is the transformative impact on faculty of teaching one of these courses. Because so much effort goes into design, course development, getting people to think about learning outcomes, designing, engineering towards learning outcomes, that faculty walk back and say, I've never thought about teaching that way before. And Aaron Driver-Lind, who runs our HILT program, has been bringing faculty together this past year to talk about, across the various professions, to talk about pedagogy. Suddenly an enormous response. So this whole discussion of how we teach, how we learn, is now penetrating all parts of the school. And I'm not sure that would have happened if we hadn't done this.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's been the driver that has changed that and has elevated the value of our faculty considering pedagogy as an important element of what it is we're doing, that it's actually a point of research. The kind of learning we're doing, colleagues like Armando Fox, who's played in this space very effectively. We actually have the English department at Berkeley had grappled for years with how to do a research methods course and didn't have the bandwidth. And one of our Distinguished Teaching Award winners got a grant from our Center for Teaching and Learning to develop a research methods course that would be online with peer-to-peer facilitation. So you instead of needing an instructor and under the guidance of a faculty member, but really leveraging what a big public institution has to do, which is take advantage of what we call vertical learning communities. So looking at our graduate students and even seniors, undergraduates, as part of that layer of how you teach, and leveraging that capacity through using that online course to advance the capacity of our undergraduates to do research. And this was focused on undergraduate research, not undergraduate.
I'd add one more thing, which I'm learning from Dustin Tingley, who heads up our research group, is that the work that went into trying to figure out how to derive meaningful variables from edX data can now be transferred to deriving meaningful variables from Canvas, from the LMS data at Harvard.
Right.
Because it's clickstream data, just like the other one, but sometimes even more complicated. That's a whole new area.
So now what are the limitations? One, we haven't figured out how to pay for this. Two, it's a heck of a lot of work for faculty and instructors, and they will burn out if they don't have a good time doing this, or maybe never do it again, or become converts. What are the other, what are we facing as far as challenges with regard to technology inspired evolution of our campuses?
So I'll add three. I think we've heard some of them today, but I'll add three that I think are challenges. I like the word, John. How do we use the online tools to find new and maybe better ways to build communities? I mean, we've heard that from people, and I get it, that, yeah, it's neat to think, okay, the kid can watch lectures in their pajamas at whatever time of the day, but we all know that the educational experience is also the community, and certainly we want it to be on campus, but are there ways to use this to build communities in other ways? There was some nice discussion today in some of the sessions, John, so that's still a challenge in my mind. The second one I'll say, as a computer scientist, look, I get it. It's easier to teach a computer science course in an online fashion just because of the nature of the material. It's not trivial, but it's easier to do. There are other disciplines where I think it's a bigger struggle, and we need to think about does it apply there? And if it does, how do we need to change it to make it happen?
But I think one of the interesting things there is rather than thinking just about a course being an online course, it's really the power of the tools. I was just in the session on digital humanities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was just like, I was very excited by the range of possibilities that were presented there. The kinds of either projects, like our senior Ashley doing with digital scanning of sarcophagi texts, to the kinds of things you can do, whether it's in music or the Bruegel project that one of our art history professors has done. So there's the range is huge, and I think we limit our imagination if we only think about on a course basis. But if we think about projects, if we think about research as intertwined, and not just research and pedagogy, but actually the way these tools can advance our scholarship or our understanding of a particular field, that to me, that's the most exciting part of this. And if we, putting aside cost and time, which I still say are the two biggest limitations that we have in this area, the landscape of possibility is really exciting.
There's another possibility too, which is not only in terms of pedagogy and helping people learn, but also bringing people together. There was somebody brought up a data point that's saying, well, that you're much more likely to continue if you're in contact with somebody else internationally. Well, I think it's going to be absolutely great if we could really figure out how to develop good discussion forums, accepting the fact that not everyone speaks English fluently, and that actually I'd put that in as a major issue, and to think more about translation issues and understanding language. But to bring people together internationally in small groups, it's great for everybody.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Peter, and you maybe want to speak to it, but my recollection is that one of the early courses out of Harvard was on copyright.
That's right.
And that it was structured in a way where they limited the the global enrollment so they could have dialogue. But I remember seeing your colleagues saying, when you're having a discussion about copyright law, and it's somebody from China and somebody from India and somebody from Kansas, the dialogue was very different than what he had at Harvard Law when it was a bunch of Harvard Law students, no disrespect.
So that going out to the world is also bringing the world into us.
Exactly.
And there's a kind of new cosmopolitanism, where it's not just the imperialism of Western academic knowledge or American academic knowledge, but it's actually learning how to listen to the world outside of the university.
So we all have roles of some kind or are connected to an office in our universities that has some plan, or hopefully a plan to have a plan. If you're the vice provost for adventures in learning, there's some adventure you're hoping for down the road. Maybe the question is what are the nature of those things that you see going forward? How big an issue is technology? What are the main goals you see from the university perspective? And what's the kind of general view around what you'd like to see happen at your institution, either in terms of program evolution, pedagogical evolution, expanded presence, value beyond the campus, whatever it is that's within your portfolio, what's the relative importance of things and how do you see these things being connected?
Why don't we begin with you?
Well done.
Well, now that you ask,
We're out of time, John. We're out of time. We're between people and drinks. We're out of time.
you think that white wine in the ice bucket upstairs is cold by now? Boy, that's a tough
Well,
question.
you asked the question.
John, you want time to think? Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I can go if you want. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I'll
Give me a second.
we are between you and drinks. It's
Right.
not a good idea.
We began at 8 o'clock this morning.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you
Sure.
and I'm not speaking for MIT. I'm
Yeah.
speaking as somebody that's part of the group that thinks about this. I think things that are very high on our list are how do we really continue to push forward the integration of online with residential?
Yep.
We've only started that.
Yep.
There are just so many more places we can go. What are the questions to ask? What are the experiments to run? We love running experiments. How do we assess it? How do we move forward with it? But that integration, I would say, is one really big thing for us moving forward. The second one is how do we better integrate the science of learning? And I'm going to use that phrase. I know there's a learning science, but the science of learning, what we know from neuroscience, from cognitive science, from economics, from other places about how learning takes place in this brain. How do we use that to both push that forward, but then wrap it back around to that first question? How does it help us think about how we teach, how we design ed pedagogy? How do we make those things go forward? And the third one is the one you raised, which is, are there ways in which we can recover our costs without badly damaging our educational mission? And again, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the example. MIT just announced a few months ago a MicroMasters as a way at the professional level of opening up access, but also having a way to try and recover some costs, because altruism is great, but at the end of the day, we are all putting a lot of money into this. But I want to go back to the way I said it. How do we do it without damaging the fundamental brand that we have around a degree? And we'll simply say, and I'm looking at the Chancellor as I say this, I think MIT still has the view that you only get an MIT degree if you have been in 02139, the zip code for that part of Cambridge.
But it's possible that in order to get that MIT degree, or somebody who's changing their academic interests, that the courses you might have out there would prepare them to build the foundation necessary to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has struck me as the great promise of the MicroMasters. The fact that you're willing to say, we stand behind these courses to the extent that if you succeed in them and you come to MIT, we will give you credit for those courses.
Yep. Yep.
Now, what better guarantee is that? You don't say that we have to accept your credit or anything. All you say is, we will do it, and the rest of you can decide what you want to do. This is a wonderful solution.
So those are my three.
Yeah, so I think many of those factors are important for us too, to put it in a kind of different frame. One thing that we're interested in continuing is just to think about what the future of higher education could look like. So I think we have come out of the gate with some particular model here and some particular ideas, but I think the most important thing is really we all continue to think about what the future might look like, to remain open to new ideas, and to continue to experiment and think about what college might look like in the future, what is the role of education in people's lives, big questions and general things about why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Something more specific, and it's a big focus in our area, has to do with innovation in teaching and learning. And there, technology is not the driver, it's one of many tools, but I think we can take and continue some of the good ideas about evolution of the campus programs, further some of those. One thing I'd point to is the Stanford 2025 project that was facilitated by the D School. For those of you who came to the noontime activity, you can see that they're great people at getting you to think about and address things in creative ways. I mentioned one of the ideas earlier, this idea of coming to college or to the university at some point and going away and being successful in one term and coming back later. There's some other ideas about, I think one slogan I like a lot is, find a mission, not a major, helping people discover, a purpose in their own lives and build their educational trajectory around that. So those, I think, are all things that transcend technology as a tool and can drive things. So one big trend is to make our use of technology and the way we try to reach off campus track and be synergistic with the forward-looking ideas that we have on campus. And then the third main direction and set of activities have to do with exploring ways to be valuable beyond the campus. So we, like other institutions, have gone to great effort to provide a productive working environment for bright, creative faculty. We have a huge amount of expertise on campus. How can we make that good and beneficial to the world? What's the right way to do that? What are the different media for approaching making our faculty expertise more broadly available? And it would be great to do that in a way that's bi-directional, that faculty involved in something learn from the people they reach, and there are other goals around that. But just to summarize, that's kind of where we are.
I guess one thing I would say has been interesting evolution in this process, to go back from the 4 years ago, that the idea that there was one great professor who would teach you whatever that particular concept was. And I know my reaction at the time was, that's a very static conception of education. That there's only one way to teach a particular subject, that context in which you were teaching would remain static over some long period of time. And one of the things that I think has also changed has been the idea that, in fact, we are constantly innovating. You're always changing your syllabi as an individual faculty member. For one thing, you get bored to death if you do it a third time the same way. And you're also bringing in information that you're learning from colleagues from other research that's going on, so that the notion that you can put in a can something is just blatantly not so. And I think there were a couple conversations today that had to do with preserving information. I think this is an area that we haven't spent a lot of time on in this meeting, but how you save certain kinds of digital materials, how you make them accessible so that you can curate and pull, as we do with other means, when you are developing a particular course or a particular course of study. I like that there was a conversation earlier today about really thinking about a program, not just about individual courses, which I think also, again, this is the online master's degrees, for example, have made us really think about an entire course in a way that I think as a faculty we do when we first get approved for a degree, but don't necessarily come back and really reconsider in any kind of regular way. And the online space makes us do that. So I think this idea of innovation, and there are questions about scale. We talked about a little bit about that replication, or that point at which you've got something that you can put out in scale. But I guess I caution against the presumption that having done that, you're done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're not.
Yeah.
So I would add, I agree with everything I've heard, but I'd add two things. One is that I think in making the tie between MOOCs and campus, reusability is really important. And reusability is not at the level of, well, watch this whole course or watch this whole hour. It may be down, watch these 3 minutes, or the equivalent of, read an article in preparation for a seminar. And to do that, we need findability. We need to be able to, video in particular is really awful, right? When it comes to trying to find things. I'd much rather have a book.
And it's expensive and hard to actually even do it. So.
And so findability is, we have to solve that problem, and we need to do it soon, because we're creating lots and lots of stuff. The other thing is that, students at Harvard at least take usually 32 courses in order to graduate. We already have almost 80 MOOCs out there. They think, many of them, that when they graduate, they're done with education. And I think what we need to start to do is change the message to all our students in colleges throughout the country that when you graduate, We hope you've learned how to learn. We hope you've learned to have the discipline necessary to learn for yourself. But that's the path you're on, the rest of your life. We were talking today about credentialing. We need lifelong credentials. We need ways in which people can keep looking and saying, how have I learned? How have I gone on? And we're actually making the material available to them to keep doing that.
So it seems like maybe we're reaching the kind of point of what are some few takeaways. I think the credentialing discussion was interesting. I got a lot out of this session on inclusive environments. One thing that surprised me there was that for all of the topics that were discussed, there were no engineering requirements. Nobody said below in Australia you need the scroll bar on the opposite side or anything like that. It was really about the content and how you make people comfortable with the material and approaching it in various ways. I thought that was really a very exciting and enlightening session, and one for which I have some new ideas to take back. Other thoughts of what small or large takeaways from the meeting here?
Well, I was impressed. I thought our opening panel was really wonderful. And it gave me a lot of hope about the actual answer to that question you posed was, what's the value of higher education? And I thought that contrast between this sort of disaggregation and atomization on the one hand, or personalization, however you want to characterize the one extreme, with the notion of building ethical communities, of understanding ourselves as part of a larger context, and the value of higher education in creating civil society. We don't have those discussions enough, and to have that this morning, to me, was just fantastic, and so I will hold on to that for a while.
I mean, I couldn't go to all the sessions, so I hate to exclude ones I didn't, but I would highlight, including the things we've heard, the discussion on data I found very valuable. It's something that's crucial to all of us, and I know some of the people who are on that panel are still here. We haven't got it figured out, but we're going to get there, but we have to do that if we're really going to use that to improve. And I'll simply say, I'll go back to Raphael's original comment. When he talked about using it to learn about learning, it was how do we use that massive amount of data to improve how we think about things. So the data discussion, I thought in particular, I found really valuable.
If we can have greater acceptance on our campus about looking at indicators of success or lack thereof,
True on all of our campuses.
Becoming more sophisticated about that. I think that would be transformative, really, in a lot of ways, and that's welcome that.
Every panel had something, right? And I guess at the end of the morning plenary session, reminded me of course, something that Confucius said. And Confucius said, the ancients, they learned for themselves, and nowadays people are just learning for others. And I think there's a way in which we need to keep in mind that learning, liberal arts and sciences learning, is learning to be a person in society, in the world, and it's not just about acquiring things that you can use. And I think one of the extraordinary things is that if we take all of online learning together, both MOOCs and other kinds of opportunities, we actually have covered a lot of ground. We've made both of those kinds of learning possible.
You want to take a few questions? Thought so. Ike, who would have thought?
Can we veto questions?
Who would have thought Ike would have a question? There's a microphone. You can go. Somebody can go get it for you if we. And then if you're not Ike and you have a question, be prepared.
Well, Brewer is also
there, ready to go.
So one thing which has really struck me a great deal at this meeting and in your very nice conversation now is that so much of the conversation is focused on education, whereas these universities we are all part of are also involved in another mission, which is research and innovation and finding new knowledge, creating new knowledge. Now, what is the connection between those two, especially with the realization that the research dollar volume is an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude larger than the educational dollar volume that we're executing? In our discussions with faculty at MIT, there has emerged this idea, this hope that MOOCs, innovations in education, and so forth will allow us to accelerate the pace of research, to be able to find new things that were never made possible before because education is improving and changing, because education is available on demand. Are you seeing that as well? Is there any hope, a realistic hope, that MOOCs and online education might help accelerate research, make new things possible, directions possible?
Well, you know, I think two things. One is I think there's already a shift in certainly the science of learning or an interest in pedagogy and approaches among faculty who might never have engaged in that as a potential research area, as opposed to what they were already doing. Not everyone's going to go that way, but I think there's more folks interested in that than I've ever seen in my 30 plus years on the faculty. I also think there's the possibility that comes from the globalization, that if you have more people engaged at a broader level and a deeper level globally, then that possibility for innovation, that child from Ulaanbaatar, that the kid in Malawi who does some, I mean, those kinds of things where you begin to get the resources of the entire globe, not just those areas that traditionally have been in that space, I think makes for that possibility.
Yeah, if I might, I would add really quickly to that, especially the first point was also good, but the latter point in that it's more indirect. But I'll go back to the copyright course or other cases. If we can build the communities, when you have discussions through this platform of people with very different perspectives, there is the hope. It's indirect, but the hope that accelerates, that different perspective leads to an insight that goes somewhere else. So that.
My first thought is you're crazy. How would that happen? How would we get smarter by having more MOOCs? But then I thought of this example that's from the second machine age that I think is early in the book and sort of a nice, easy thing to remember, which is to plot the age of chess grandmasters over time. And so this has dropped tremendously. And the explanation is the availability of tools for learning chess more readily. That up to a certain point in time, if you wanted to become a chess grandmaster, you had to go to one of the great libraries where there's the collection of all the successful historical chess openings, and you can analyze all the records of all the games. And somebody else knows a lot more about chess than I do, so I'm kind of making that up. But basically, when you have a program that can play chess with you all the time, and can have all of these things recorded in it, and you can go download that as a phone or iPad app, then it's possible for people to reach that level of mastery much more easily at a much younger age. I think that is possible, that we really can be more effective at learning the things that are important to us through different means.
I'll just ask quickly, maybe you all could comment a little bit on the world of work and industry and how it might intersect with this world of improved learning and learning science. Dana Gioia, who used to be the director of the National Endowment of Humanities, talked about learning being about building productive citizens for a free society. And it's both those things, right? Citizens for a free society is the whole dimension.
And productive.
But the productive citizens without engaging with industry seems weird too. So I'm curious how you see technology in your institutions and how you see faculty relationships with industry after folks leave. How does that play in with the technology and data and all that?
Sure. I mean, both of these things are going on, right? Many of our students are going on to careers in industry. They're not all going to become academics like us. And many of the things that, if I look at, for example, what edX is looking at, how do they, in fact, start to build collaborations with industry to help prepare students better. So I don't think there's any sense of a problem as such.
By coincidence, we are in the room that I teach Tuesday, Thursday this quarter. And normally there's a kind of a table here, and there's a whiteboard and a projector. And those two cameras there are used to video record the class meeting and make that broadly available to people who enroll through SCPD, Stanford Center for Professional Development. At present, the SCPD model is simply broadcast of those video to remote learners, and those who are enrolled, turn in the same homework, the same projects as students on campus and get the same grading. But they don't have the chance to interact during the course meeting. That's been the case since we moved to the web, which is now a good long period of time. Prior to that, that set of courses were delivered through a kind of microwave link and local kind of connections with the then prosperous companies of the Valley like Sun and HP and so on. And in those days, I really got a lot out of that I don't get now, which is you could talk about agile software development and say, who in the class working in one of the companies nearby is using that method? And somebody would pipe up and say, we use that in our environment, our teams use that methodology, but we do it this way, not some other way. So we lost in some technology change the connection to working professionals in an interactive sense in our discussion. So that's one thing that I think we might hope to bring back. If we have courses and activities that engage working professionals, they have a lot to contribute that's both content-based in some sense for the students, for other students in the class, and in addition, some sort of validation. If some silly professor at the front of the room says this is practical, nobody really believes you. But if somebody working in a company says, I use that and I need that, and my boss would not be as happy if I didn't know that, that's night and day better. So those are some ways that we can relate to working professionals.
I think the way you framed it is actually a completely untapped area in some respects. We're used to, in our extensions or other things, there's corporate training, there's ways in which we engage, but not in that dynamic way that you described. I do remember taking a course at Stanford. I mean, there was TV systems and there was an interaction. Stanford was way out ahead of everybody else because this is I won't reveal
The
that.
audio was not very good.
The audio was not very good, but it was like 1978 when this was going on, and that interaction, was real. And I do think it's an area where we are not, if we're thinking about lifelong learning and a continuous interaction with our, not just our alumni, but a broader spectrum of folks, I think we're only at the very beginning of how we might accomplish that and how we might engage very broadly in that way. I think it's actually, we're pretty much kindergartners at this point in that relationship.
Couple more questions, or yeah.
Sure. So we're getting toward the end of the day on Saturday, so I will ask something a little bit, not even metaphorical, but fantastical, just to sort of get us a little energy here. First of all, John, thanks to you and everybody here for making this a wonderful experience at Stanford. And as sitting outside this morning, it's such a beautiful campus, and I think all of us, our campuses are some of the most beautiful places on the planet. Quite honestly, we're very fortunate to work in these kinds of places, and you look at the kinds of infrastructure that we've built for our residential experience. We've heard a lot of reference to, but the residential experience won't go away. I kind of wonder if, 50 years from now, people will be sort of giggling at that phrase. But I think my point is this, and here's my fantastical question, and I'll just follow it with a slightly less absurd question. What do you think would happen if our governing boards tomorrow were to wake up and say, for every $1 we spend on physical face-to-face infrastructure, we have to spend $1 on digital teaching and learning infrastructure? So that's and at the University of Washington alone, we have $2 billion in projected campus expenses and new buildings over the next 10 years. So that would dwarf anything related to what we've invested so far. Here's the slightly less fantastical version. Even our IT infrastructure budgets for IT infrastructure tend to be 92 to 97% focused on administrative systems. So even saying, let's take those and say we have to say at least we invest the same amount in teaching and learning as we do in the administrative systems on campus. So just kind of an open-ended question there, but when part of this is not about the money, it's about the seriousness with which we really take this on our campuses. And what do you think it'll take to shift the tide tide to really take a serious view on this, because, when we talk about the 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 million that some of you all have put into these efforts and infrastructures, we're about to build one building on our campus for computer science. It's going to cost $145 million. So what could you do for one program and the reach that you could increase with that kind of investment?
Everybody's pointing to you, Eric. For some reason, I don't know why.
Are you asking about my campus, or are you asking generally? Because they're two different questions.
I think it's generally right. I'm not minimizing the kinds of investments we've made and where we stand. And we're in 1472 if this was the printing press, right? So we're at the beginning of a very long road. But I still think it's an indicator more of priority than it is necessarily the actual dollars.
A quick answer is, I think, threefold. One, I think many institutions are beginning to make that kind of commitment. I think these two institutions took a gamble, saying we're each going to invest $30 million which you could say is small, but it's $30 million you're taking out of general budget to launch edX as part of what we would do. I think, to your point, the second one is, given my current job, yes. I'm talking to alumni, I'm talking to parents, I'm talking to unaffiliated people about opportunities, one big one of which for MIT at least is, how do we take this forward? And the same way that I'm going to be unfair and say, the same way you raise money for a football coach, which we don't have that problem because we're a Division III school, although we did fine a couple of years ago. Help us do this around education. And I would hope for all institutions that rely on that kind of endowment support, find ways to persuade people that this is a way to really have an impact. And the last thing I'll say is, I've been delighted how many MIT alumni have in fact said, you bet, I want to put $5 million, I want to put $10 million into this because this is so important to the future, and I hope others of you have the same opportunity. But I think we are changing it. I think, maybe we're not, build a new football stadium or build a new IT system, but, we'll get there.
Sounds like we could have all gone here, somewhere in the middle of what you're saying. So, but why don't we take your suggestion and give a round of applause for Petra in the back.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
And our thanks to John and all of Stanford for organizing.
Anybody here from the camera crew or Carrie upstairs and so on. So thank you all for making everything work. Why don't you find us one more question, and unless you're it.
But in between, can I also say thank you to the steering committee who's sitting up there and to the program committee. I just want to mention a few names. You're all sitting up there. Program committee for this conference was Marty Hurst, Glinda Hull, Rob Liu, Greg Niemeyer, Sanjay Sarma, Bernd Giraud, and then our absolute comrades in arms, Mitchell Stevens and Candace Till. I can't thank you enough. I mean, you've really made everything wonderful. Thank you.